identity and story are so important and constantly shifting and changing. And so, Hannah, I'd love to ask you, what are some identities that are important to you and how do you express them?
In your introduction of me, and how I usually introduce myself is that I'm a queer disabled writer. So just within that phrase, I'm identifying as queer, as disabled, and as a writer. All of those are very important to me. And I've found throughout my life a very interesting intersection, I would say, of my queer disability and my disabled identity. And for example, you asked, how do you express them? So I'm very visibly physically disabled. I use a wheelchair. My body is shaped differently than the standard, whatever that means, non-disabled body. From a young age, I never really had a choice of not showing my disability. It was always present. That part of my identity was always present for others to see. However, in many ways, it was simply a part of my identity that was read on me, if that makes sense. It was a story that others were reading on my body, on my disabled body. It took a while, really, until I would say about around the age of 18, when I started to really think about what it meant to be disabled and to really integrate that into my identity as I understood it. And then also, very interestingly, my queer identity is something that I do have more choice over how people see that, how it is expressed. I'm pretty straight passing, unless I'm wearing bright rainbow colors or people see the stickers on the back of my van or the stickers on my chair, or, if people look me up online, they're not going to automatically know that I'm queer. And yet, it is an important part of my identity. And so I do like to find ways to express it, like I said, perhaps what I wear, how I dress, or even just stickers on my wheelchair, on my van, on my water bottles, etc. Yeah, and so, I think that, as I think we're going to get into with the resource that you're about to share, we have so many different identities, and oftentimes what is most visibly apparent takes precedence in how the world around us interacts with us and sees us. And oftentimes that then translates into how we see ourselves as well.
I found myself really, really gravitating towards this and read on you as you were describing expression, and that kind of takes me to a second question, and how that ties into what stories do you tell others and what stories do others tell you?
When I was young and growing up, I was fed the narrative, the story, as I think many disabled children are, that just because you're disabled doesn't mean you can't do everything you set your mind to. And there's a lot of, well, there obviously are benefits of that, of having that belief, right? Because we're combating the very negative stereotypes and negative connotations with disability. However, that that idea, which we will refer to as the supercrip narrative. So the idea that disabled people not only have to go above and beyond, but they also can go above and beyond. And there's this sort of extra pressure, right, to overachieve and prove to the world that just because you're disabled doesn't mean you're not worthy, whatever we're choosing to define that as, which I think is pretty subjective. So, to follow up on that, I will say that because that was a lot of the narrative that I was getting growing up, and I'll also say that was one of many, our culture and society has many different ideas and beliefs and narratives about disability. So this was just one. But because of that, and because I was really in a community where, you know, things were made possible, people wanted to make opportunities possible for me. That is then the story that I began to tell other people about myself. And I also think, you know, to this day, there is an element of that in how I talk about my disability, even if it's something that I'm trying to move away from. And the tricky part, or the sad part, I guess we could say, is that when I talk to myself, the story that I tell myself about my disability is sometimes very positive and sometimes very negative. And I don't mean that in a negative, authentic aspect, because it's very important that we as disabled people allow ourselves to talk about the negatives of having a disability and the negatives of moving through a world as a disabled person. That is like huge because, like I said, right, like the supercrip narrative robs us of that. But what I mean more is that sometimes the story that I tell myself about my disability is negative in the fact of, oh, I'm not worthy of X, Y, and Z because I'm disabled. Or, you know, my life is going to look lonely because I'm disabled. And I think that those ideas also have been instilled within me by how the world works in our culture and society. But it's interesting to think about how that story is so vastly different from the story that I historically have told other people. And I think finding a way to reconcile those two and bring them together for something that's more authentic. Because ultimately, like, I want disabled people, and I want this for myself too, to be able to live authentically and genuinely, and also have autonomy over the stories that we tell about ourselves.
Wow. I was going to ask you a bit about those stories that we tell ourselves. So thank you for talking a bit about that and the impact of external stories. This kind of takes us to some resources I'd love to share with you all. We have a little resource packet we're going to share at the end of this, but one of them is talking a bit about identity and the different lenses that we use to perceive not just the world, but ourselves. So the first one is called Who Am I Today? And it is an exercise that helps you jot down different versions of who you are, whether that is a person who identifies as having a disability, a person who considers themselves to be a gardener, an optimist, an introvert, an extrovert, all these different things that make you who you are, and what that means to how you can be kind to yourself and how you can use it to explore your identity deeper and notice the shifts over time. So we'll share that with you in a packet after this. Another big one, kind of especially tying to what Hannah's talking about, is the language that others use and the language that we use to describe ourselves. And so we put together a couple pages of vocabulary that might be meaningful and helpful to some people who may not have a concrete grounding in these words, these definitions that we use and others use to put us into these different spaces and places in their minds, and that we use to put ourselves in these spaces and places in our own minds and perceptions of ourselves. So we will get those over to you later in a lovely pack. I'm very proud of them because I made them super pretty. And Hannah really put a lot of love and care in them. And we do want to shout out Emily Ladau and her book, Demystifying Disabilities, as a really prime resource for a lot of these materials. And we have a link in our Pride toolkit that we're putting together that will take you to her website and her book that is just beyond phenomenal. We highly recommend it. And Hannah is the one that introduced it to me. So thank you for that, Hannah. While we kind of talked a bit about stories, a core element of stories is narrative. And I noticed that you refer to yourself as disabled, not someone with a disability. Can you explain your reasoning behind that choice?
Sure. So this ties also to some of the resources that you'll be sharing later with participants, Martha. But there are multiple disability models, is what we refer to them as. And essentially that just means different ways of talking about and understanding disability. The two most well-known models that people think of are the medical model and the social model. And I want to say, before I give a very quick overview of what these are, that from my perspective, neither of them can really exist on their own. Each of them have flaws, each of them have benefits. And if you spend time online or in disability community, you will hear that different people have different perspectives on these for various reasons. So the medical model is what generally, historically, our culture has used to view disability. And what it says is that disability exists within our bodies and our minds. And therefore, it is a problem that needs to be fixed, treated, or cured. The social model of disability says something completely different. And it says that actually we are disabled by the conditions of the world around us. We are disabled by a building having steps, for example, and not a ramp. We're disabled by us not having eyeglasses that allow us to see. We're disabled by events not having sign language interpreters. And we're disabled by various attitudes and beliefs that our society carries about disability. Again, from my perspective, and I think many people would agree with this, neither model is perfect. Each of them have truth to them, and each of them have flaws. Now, I prefer to think of the social model of disability because it says that nothing is wrong with me, and that actually, if the world was more accessible and inclusive of disability, I would, quote unquote, not be disabled. But also, I have various health conditions that will never be alleviated by how the world sees me and how the world is built. And that is where I think it's important to allow space for the medical model, because our bodies are real, our minds are real, right? And there are going to be different ways that we live in them. Now, to get back to your question of disabled versus someone with a disability. So there also then are two largely used ways of thinking about language and disability. So there's person-first language and identity-first language. Person-first language says that we should always say a person with a disability. Identity-first language makes the argument that it's a part of our identity, it's nothing to be ashamed of, and we can say disabled person. I prefer identity-first language because it is something that is a huge part of my identity, excuse me. And also, for me, saying person with a disability would be like saying person with queerness, which just feels weird and unnecessary. And also, I am disabled. I am disabled by the inaccessible world around me. And I also have no shame in saying that my body is disabled as well. I hope that answered your question.
That and then some. You bring up something really interesting that kind of ties into what I hope we can talk about next, because you and I have had several conversations that left me a better person after them.
That's so sweet.
We talked a bit about the fact that you have a very visible disability. You shared with me that there are still ways that you hide it. And as we're talking about stories and external and internal narratives, can you talk a bit about that and explain it to me and this awesome group of people?
Sure. So, and I also just want to take a quick moment to add that I also have various mental illnesses. And so it's a part of me that I have not historically identified as, also having a disability in this way. But I do think it's important to share because we frequently do not allow people with disabilities, disabled people, physically disabled people to have any sort of mental health issues when, of course, mental health struggles exist for people across the board. So I just want to throw that out there as well.
Thank you.
There's these invisible disabilities as well. So yes, I have, explained to you that although my physical disability is extremely visible, there are ways I hide it. And one particular, I think, poignant example of this is how I view myself in photos that are taken of me. And I have found over the course of my life that when I am looking at photos that have been taken of me, I have a more positive gut reaction to those that I look less disabled in. And, that could mean many things. Sometimes that means that my wheelchair is less visible, although generally it more means how my body is shaped, how my body, maybe the angle that my body is being shown. And I think that is likely something that most people, whether they're disabled or not, can relate to, in that we look at photos of ourselves and we pick very specific images that show us in a way that appeals to traditional ideas of beauty or even just personhood. How someone looks is perhaps our culture perhaps uses that to then think about what that person is worthy of. And I think that that also then gets integrated into how we view images of ourselves. And in particular, I want to share this brief anecdote about a Discord server that I was in a year or so ago. And it was really a queer community building Discord server. People would share photos of themselves and hype each other up. So this space started out as a very healthy space for me. And over time, it quickly became not so. And not necessarily because of the other participants, but because of how I was presenting myself. And what I mean by that is that I would take photos in which I did not look as disabled, or in which I was very clearly hiding my disability. And those photos would have a lot of very positive reactions. People would hype me up. And that felt good, right? It felt good at the beginning. And the more time went on, the more I realized, oh my goodness, I am very intentionally creating images of myself where I do not look disabled. And although the positive response feels good on the surface level, it actually feels pretty bad, because I am slicing out a very integral part of who I am. And since then, I've thought, how can I look at photos of myself where I clearly am disabled and really love who I see there? And I don't think, I don't think that's necessarily like something that happens overnight. I think that it's an ongoing thing. And I think that, people who have visible disabilities, even though, like I said earlier, we really don't have a choice of disclosing that disability, there are still ways that we hide it. Even if that's not, not telling somebody that you're disabled, because we can't really do that, right? There are still ways that we shrink that part of ourselves down until it's gone or very, very small.
Wow. I just want to thank you for that. And just a couple of things. One, that actually made me very emotional. And I just want to share my deep gratitude with you for being open to sharing that with us, something that is both personal and profound. As someone with invisible disabilities, I have those moments as well of hiding, and it's really eye-opening to hear that commentary that you're able to provide. I have a daughter. She's just 2 years old, and the language that you use of shrinking, of changing these different aspects of ourselves for this moment to make ourselves less necessarily authentic,
right?
Who we are. I don't think it just impacts us, it impacts everyone in the community. And that makes me think a bit about pride and what that looks like when it comes to identity. So I would love to talk to you a bit about that, and everyone in this chat too. If you have something to add, let's have a little conversation about it. Like, what does pride look like in these moments of living in a society that's so visual, that's so constantly engaged and so constantly judging and putting itself into these boxes. Like, how do you live yourself? How do you live your life authentically? Hannah, maybe you can kick us off.
Sure. And I also want to just circle back on what you had said, Martha, about the language that we use, how we show up. It doesn't just impact ourselves, right? It impacts other people. And this goes into the conversation on pride, and is also related to photos. And what I found growing up, and even to this day, is that seeing very clearly disabled people out in the community, online, in very genuine, authentic, disabled ways, that has been one of the most, if not the most helpful thing for me in embracing who I am. And I would also say that, just seeing photos of other disabled people who look disabled, for lack of better word, right? Like, they don't look like an able-bodied person in a manual wheelchair, which I am not in any way trying to create a disability hierarchy or say that one, is worse than the other. I just want us to think about, like, how your body actually looks, and maybe a more accurate idea would be how you're embodied. Like, how are you showing up in the world in a body and a mind? And does that look like traditional ideals, or does that look a little bit different? And for me, just the pure act of being exposed to more images, more videos, literally just more people in my physical community, having friends who are visibly disabled, that allows me to see the beauty in disability. And that goes into the conversation on pride. And I want to again say, like, it is so important that we as disabled people do not fall into the trap of only thinking and talking positively about our disability. It is crucial that we allow ourselves to authentically feel both the hard things and the really beautiful things. And so, when we talk about pride, I want to be very clear that this is not pride in the same way of just like brushing everything hard under the rug. In fact, it really is feeling proud of who you are despite all of that. And even that doesn't really feel right now that I've said that out loud. It's really more just pride in who you are authentically. And to me, it also comes down to choice and autonomy and authenticity. So, it's how you are utilizing choice in your life and your identity. And as we said earlier, Martha, like, that the language, the ideas, the stories, they're not just for us, they're for everyone else as well. And when you and I have had conversations previously, you'd come up with the idea that disability pride is really communal advocacy, which we could say means that disability pride is not just for yourself, it's also for everyone else in your community to see that actually there is a lot of beautiful things about a disabled life. And actually, we gave a shout out to Emily Liddell earlier, and I want to share a quote that just came to my mind. I believe it's from her book, Demystifying Disability. And the quote is, "We're not bitter. We just have the audacity to believe that a disabled life is worth living." And that, I think, is what disability pride is. It's the belief that our lives are worth living and that other disabled people's lives are also worth living. And, working to feel that about yourself, which does not mean, again, simply ignoring the hard days. It does not mean ignoring the hard things, the attitudes that come from other people, the access barriers that we encounter. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means being able to see that there is truly nothing wrong with who you are and that your life really is worth living as it is. I'll leave it with that.
Thank you, Hannah. That was, again, just so profound. And I just want to add that there is such humanity in the bad days and the exploration of who we are in those moments. You are never more human than when you are inside your head thinking about your feelings and what led you to them. And those can be good or bad. They are all valid and they all help make you who you are, and that makes the world a better, more beautiful place.
Well, also, can I add one more thing,
Martha? Oh, please, yeah.
So what you said then made me realize, too, the reason that I keep coming back to this idea of not falling into the one-track idea of disability is great, disability is wonderful. I don't want us to fall into that, to solely that idea, because when I think about, like I said earlier in the discussion, when I think about what I want for my disabled community and also for myself as a disabled person is true autonomy, which we could also say true choice over the stories that we choose, that we select for ourselves and for our identities. And in my opinion, simply saying, oh, disability is great, there's nothing, like there are no bad things about disability, that is also just taking a story that we've been told by society and culture. And so, I don't, like, to me, that doesn't feel like true choice. That doesn't feel like true autonomy. But being able to really think about where these stories are showing up in your life and choosing and thinking about, okay, what do I have a choice over? What do I not? Like that, I think is where the autonomy lies.
Yeah, could not agree more. Thank you. And I would love to, at this point, take all these beautiful nuggets, give people a couple seconds to digest and see if they have any questions, any thoughts that they want to share. There's many ways to do that. You can put your questions to the Q&A if you want to, if you feel emboldened, maybe just go ahead and ask your question out loud. Let's see how that goes. Like anything that's comfortable. We have a good 8 to 10 minutes for questions. Let's make the most of it.
Hannah, this is a question from Erin. Can you please repeat the title of the book and the author that you referred to?
And perhaps this could also be dropped in the chat, maybe. So the title is Demystifying Disability. And the spelling of demystifying, because it's very tricky, is DEMYSTIFYING, Disability, by Emily Ladau. Her last name is Ladau. And again, this will be included in the packet of resources that Martha has so generously put together. Her last name is Ladau. I possibly said that wrong.
Oh, I'm gonna pop it in the chat.
And so it's short, it's concise, it's brief, and it's very accessible. And I like to think of it as a primer on disability. And I will say that it is, I think, meant to be a book for non-disabled people to learn about disability and learn how to be a good ally. But it does have just really good overview of various things that we were talking about, like the different models of disability, person first versus identity first, language. It has a really good overview of disability history in the US. And so, like I said, even though, I believe the audience is largely intended to be non-disabled people, for me, even though I'm not necessarily part of the large target audience, reading content like that, especially because it's created by a disabled woman, that then helps me to feel validated in my experiences as well. So I think it's very beneficial for anyone and everyone.
Hi, Hannah.
Hi.
Hello. I just wanted to thank you again for being here and sharing your journey. It's incredibly meaningful to hear your story. I do have a question that I would love to ask. If you could go back and give advice to your younger self about identity and disability, what would you say?
That is such a hard question. But a great one, a very fantastic question. And I would say the most obvious thing that comes to mind would be to tell myself that there's nothing wrong with me, and that I am still worthy of love, respect, healthcare, all the things that we think non-disabled people are also worthy of. But I would also say something a bit more specific would be telling myself to find a disability community soon. I would say I really found disability community in a very authentic way around the time I turned 18. And that began with a Facebook group for adults, which is why I did not have access to it when I was younger, adults with neuromuscular conditions. And that, being in that Facebook group, truly changed my perspective on disability. It changed my life. It changed how I thought about myself. And really, I think being in those spaces then opened up all these doors to other disability ideas, reading books about disability, looking at content from disabled creators. And yeah, I mean, I think that is such a crucial aspect of embracing who you are and even beginning to have pride in who you are. So that would be the more specific piece of advice. And then the overarching there is nothing wrong with you.
Thank you so much for that.
Of course. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. So we're down to our last 2 minutes. I'd love to leave it open for one last question from the audience, if you have any. All right, I have one. I would love to ask you one final question, kind of tying back to what you just said. If you could make sure that participants left this workshop with one thing, what would you want them to take with them?
Oh, that's another really good and hard question. I would encourage participants, just like I would encourage a younger me, to intentionally seek out disability community, intentionally make friends with other disabled people, people who are older than you, who can be your mentors, as well as people around your same age who can speak to, the experience of being disabled at that age. But, I really am hoping that people leave with the sense of feeling more empowered over their own story that they tell about themselves and their disability, and an understanding that really they get to choose. We all get to choose the story that we tell about ourselves and our identities, and feeling empowered to do so.
Thank you so much, Hannah. If you'd like, can you please take a moment to share where people can follow your work and stay connected?
Yes, thank you. So my website is hannahsoyer.com, HANNAHSOYER.com. And I am on social media, but very sparingly. So I will include those links in the follow-up, and I will do my best to accept your request, although I'm not sure. I'm very rarely on there. And I will also just very selfishly plug that my memoir is coming out next June 2026 from Red Hen. They're a fabulous indie publisher located in LA. And that book is actually available for pre-order. Of course, I am, please do what is financially accessible to you. I'm not trying to sell something, but I will also say something that is great is just down the road asking your public library to carry my book. That is also a really fantastic action that you can take in that way. And I also, Martha, we'll include my email address in the packet, because I would definitely welcome people to email me.
Okay, absolutely. I will make sure all this information is included. And thank you so much for sharing that. A few quick reminders before we sign off. All of the resources mentioned today will be emailed to you, and they'll also be available on the Ability Central portal. It's just going to be the site that you use to register here. We're going to have them on the right side, easily accessible for you, for anyone that you think would benefit from them. Please point them toward that page. Our next workshop is called Mental Health Check-In, Tools for Tough Days, and that's going to be taking place in early November. We'll be sure to give you guys first priority, and we hope to see you there. And if you have any questions after today, you can always reach us at community@abilitycentral.org. On behalf of Ability Central, thank you again for being here. We hope you leave with new reflections, fresh inspiration, and a sense of community. We look forward to seeing you at our next session. Thank you, and take care, everyone. And thank you again, the wonderful Hannah Soyer. Thank you.
Also, I just want to briefly say a huge thank you to Martha. You did a lot of work putting this together, so it was really wonderful working with you. And yeah, thank you everyone for coming. This was a really lovely, lovely way to spend an hour.